Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. And hi, Barry.
Hi, Del. It's good to be back for more deep conversations.
I know. Well, we had a good one last week. Last week was what was last week? I'm starting off again. I forgot.
About trust?
No, it was healthy communication.
Yes, right.
Yeah, so as a follow-up to that, we thought we would talk about recognizing your emotional triggers, because sometimes we have, residue from our past, say from our childhood, where we sometimes project that onto our partners. And everything. Say that again.
When you say we're going to talk about emotional triggers, I was almost going to go dan dan dan. It was like there was a dramatic feeling to that tone. So emotional triggers can be a big topic. So
exactly, quite sinister. So
yes, indeed.
All right, then. So let's just start with. I mean, I know for me, as I've mentioned before, growing up without a father, I could sometimes project that wound onto my partner. I would sometimes feel, especially having my father lived just a couple of miles down the road, and that abandonment and that absolute indifference to the fact that I even existed. Never mind, it was, so there was a part of me that if you didn't see me or hear me, it would enrage me. Because that was old rage from my childhood of having been ignored by my father. I mean, maybe I'm a little strong saying enraged, but I would probably have a bigger reaction than was appropriate if I was with somebody that wasn't paying attention to me like I needed a lot of attention, but say they were ignoring me or dismissing me. My upset would be a little more than was warranted. I'll put it that way.
Well, yeah, no, I totally get it. I mean, I grew up thankfully in a fairly, quote, normal family, but I know there's definitely some things that show up for me. One of those for me, and it's interesting because it's not a big thing, except when it's inside of me. Because the other part of emotional triggers, they may not be massive, like overt things. They can be subtle. For me, one of those things was when people don't ask me to do things, they tell me to do things. And that was the thing, because that's been coming up recently with somebody I know. And I think because she reminds me a bit of my mother, so some of that is in there where I go, not only is there the wording, but the approach feels that way. And so this thing about, this needs to get done versus would you do this for me?
Yeah.
And I watch myself, and thankfully because I've done enough work, I don't go, how dare you do that? I don't react to it. But I feel that little unsettlement inside going, oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
And so I just look at it and go, okay, that's not me, that's her. Because that's the other part about emotional triggers is oftentimes we sort of think that it's ours. It's like we sort of take it on. It's like, hang on, it's their stuff, not mine. I can let go of it.
Absolutely. And I love the way you say, I want to clarify that what I just mentioned earlier too, that was in the past before all the work I've done too.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about it as experienced learners of this.
Yeah, exactly. I think we still do it. But again, it's sneaky and it can be there. So it's good to really understand your past. And I'm totally with you. I don't know. My mum and dad were both so absent. I can't even remember being told to do things. We were just taking care of ourselves a lot. But I also don't like that. I remember in my past relationship with the narcissist, I used to say, they would say to me, do this, please, as opposed to, would you mind doing this? And I would try and educate them that was a polite command as opposed to a polite request. And it really is. There's a difference between commanding somebody to do something and then tagging along, please, at the end, as opposed to really asking somebody if they would like to do this for you. So I do think that's something that we, a communication style that we have to pay attention to as well.
Absolutely.
But, so I'm trying to think what's some other triggers.
Well, I was going to say from what you said, because I want to sort of explain a little bit more, because the thing on my one, what I'm realizing more and more with this current experience I'm having, is it's not so much that I'm being told to do something, It's more about I'm being told that something needs to be done with the assumption that I will do it.
Yeah,
That's even more like a smack in the face sort of thing. Because if you're saying go do that, that's pain, that's upsetting enough because it's not clean. But
yeah,
when they say that needs to get done with
yes,
the unspoken not saying, "Would you do that for me, please?"
yes,
That
exactly.
goes, that's even more of a like twisting the knife. You know,
So, Barry, what are you doing to clarify and clean that up?
I've had the conversation a couple of times actually, and the thing about it is interesting because in this case, the other person has not yet taken it on fully. They start off with, oh, they get it, and then they forget and get back into the default.
Yes.
And frankly, for me, it becomes amusing because I'm actually, because what happens is funny, the way inside of me is when that gets sent to me in the way it's communicated, I sort of hold it outside myself. There's a part of me actually can almost look at it and go, oh, look at that. Almost like I'm looking at some words in the middle of space going, that isn't about me at all. Interesting how that person's chosen to do that. So for me, what it's really about, in a sense, is to be one self-aware enough not to automatically buy into it, but
Mhm.
secondly, to look at it from the point of view of neutrality, because for me, that's one of my biggest lessons and ultimately gifts is being more of an observer and a witness versus being a reactive person in the conversation.
Yeah,
That's been the biggest shift. How about
yeah.
you?
Oh, absolutely. I love that. And I think it's so true. I mean, when anybody opens their mouth and says something, they're really revealing who they are, how they think, how their
Indeed.
brain works. They never, even when they're doing the you, it's still all about them, about how they're
Yeah.
sharing who they are. And so if somebody is rude, it again, like you, I can often look at it. I might have an initial reaction. I do. I have a situation right now where I feel somebody was aggressive. Um,
Hmm.
and and totally attacked one of my siblings, which was unwarranted. And
Right.
initially, I felt, sort of, I knew I needed to not respond immediately. I knew I was going to take my time.
Yes.
And I've been mulling it over for a few days in my head, editing and not being sort of reactive. But I do have to put the situation, have to correct that they had mistakenly maligned one of my sisters. So, I mean, it was extremely aggressive what they accused her of and blamed her of and everything like that. So I do have to correct that my decision was not based on something my sister had told me. So I have to
Right.
correct that. But I also see that the upset and the aggression in which the text that came to me was it was them. I wasn't affronted by it. I didn't like seeing injustice, so I do have to correct that because it wasn't a totally unjust accusation. But I also know well enough to let myself settle because there is that part of me that can be quick to have a reaction inside of me, which I am totally okay with. As we've spoken about before, I'm totally okay with having all my feelings and expressing them within myself, but
Yeah.
I'm very responsible about how I then act upon that. But again, the trigger for me was, I think I have that fight and flight thing. Actually, that's another show. We're going to do another one on fight or
Oh,
flight.
we can. Yes.
That's a really good one. But that is a part of me is I can be a little sort of, if you prod me, there's a part of me that wants to sort of, but I have to hold back from that, be measured and see that they've just revealed themselves to me and it has nothing really to do with me. So I don't need to defend myself.
Yeah, and that's the thing I mean, this, I think we talked about in one of the previous episodes about how it's so good. The whole thing about when you get upset, count to 10. This
Mm,
is one of those reasons why it's good to have that choice. Like you said, like to take a moment to pause before you respond, or should say before you react. Another show I know, response versus reaction. But the idea about when something happens, to sit with it for a moment before we choose to say anything, so that what comes out of us is a conscious response versus an unconscious reaction.
yeah,
Because we go, hang on a second, it's all about them. I don't need to get upset about this. It's
mm,
almost like that processing time to review as it. And the thing about this also, there's the other part too. And I think we talked about this before about oftentimes we've got to jump back in the conversation. We can't have a gap in there because something's wrong with us if we don't respond. It's like, no. In fact, when someone does say something, intend something that we feel is going to be a trigger for us, because we're pretty good at recognizing our own triggers, ideally, is that we can stop in that moment and not jump back in and not react to it, but to take a moment to almost like count to 10. And it may just be just counting to 10. But at the same time, what happens is like our thermostat sort of, or our temperature just settles down a bit.
Yeah.
And so we can actually respond in a different way, which can be counterproductive for them, because they may have been looking for a rise in us to feel their control. That's the other part. Some people will use that leverage when they know what triggers us to actually weaponize it. So they use it to get a reaction so they feel better about themselves because we were knocked out of center.
Yeah.
So when we learn how to be more self-aware and choose how we want to respond, it's like it disarms their weapon.
Yeah, I know. I'm having the somebody once told me it's called, stay on your perch, like a bird in a cage. Don't get rattled off your perch and start flying out the cage and spinning in circles. So it is and I'm laughing because you're saying, take a couple of moments. I'm thinking, what? I've taken a few days over this one.
Well, that's an option too.
Exactly. However long it takes, and again, it's and when we do have that awareness of our triggers, so it's good to go back into our childhood and really, what hurt us, what did we experience that we felt hurt by, and to just already have it in your back pocket, like, oh, I know this is a trigger of mine. So if somebody else, like, I'm trying to think, my fiance, he's sometimes, I think what his trigger is. Sometimes that, sometimes he has to have an opinion about everything. And he's a lovely, lovely man, but he says it's my trigger because as a child, I didn't feel that my opinion mattered. So what happens is he then it can get very strong about, he's also Israeli, and I think it's part of the culture to not have a filter so much, but he's very strong about sharing his opinions on things, even when he's not asked for it. And sometimes me being British is like, I'm like, did I ask you for your opinion? I think I've got this handled. I'm fine. We talk about it, and he said it's a trigger from his childhood where his voice didn't matter. And he's aware of it now. So he's more aware of not just, as I say, blurting things out. He's more, because like with my children, I'm very much, do you need to vent or are you asking me for my advice? And my children are very clear. It's like, I would like your opinion, or no, I just need to vent. And I 100% respect what they need from me. And sometimes I'll say to my fiance, well, I just need to sort of get this out. And then he starts to give me advice. I'm like, no, I didn't ask for that. I'm just venting right now. So it's an interesting thing. So So
I was going to say that's the thing. What you said, particularly with your kids, but also with him too. It is okay to be upset. It's what you do with it. And again, it's like the thing is, when you get upset, what do you do with it? Do you use it as a retaliatory weapon, or do you simply work with it and say, I need to get this out? And if you're with somebody in a relationship where they unconsciously or unintentionally trigger you emotionally, they hit your trigger, but the first time it happens, you might have no wherewithal to know that even happened. You already planted one on their cheek before they even realize, it's so quick and unconscious.
Yeah.
Ideally, though, you've done enough work before you're in a relationship, or at this point forward you are, so that when you do have an experience of that trigger happening, that you can say to them, it's like, you know what, give me 5 minutes, I need to go vent, I'll be back. So you sort of do take care of yourself and let yourself have that emotional release, because the thing is not about bottling it up or stuffing it down. That's the thing. I mean, yes, when you've done enough work and you've had enough venting, you may not need to vent anymore. But for a lot of people, it's good to say, you know what, I'm just going to go outside and yell in the backyard, or yell into a pillow, or go for a walk around the block first, and then come back and a conversation. It's that permission for ourselves, respecting ourselves enough to give ourselves permission to have that release, and then we come back into an intelligent and, yes, a perch-based conversation.
Yeah. I know, it's so funny with the and I'm just laughing at myself because my initial response to this person attacking my younger sister was, I had a lot of feelings about it. I was very aware that I needed to allow those feelings up and out, to imagine, I didn't actually put it on paper, but imagining the response I would like to have, really correcting this person on many issues. And instead of, and then sort of editing it down and editing it down. So to take the fire out of it and have it be what I considered appropriate and non-aggressive, and but at the same time, as I say, clearing up some major misunderstanding. And I shared it with another sister today, and she went, "Oh my God, that's so contained." So it was funny. It was like I was looking at the whole sort of the range of response we can have in that moment. But back to our subject about the projection. As I say, understanding the triggers that were installed by our parents or in our upbringing, and how not to project them onto our partners. I mean, again, it's that sort of assumption that we know what they're doing or what they mean by something. And we have to be so clean about, hang on a minute, this might feel like this to us because it's reminding us of a past, wound. But is it really going on right now? Have you checked in, or are you just being reminded and responding from that place?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that we, again, I mean, people listen to our podcast, I think, have done some work already, because, to be honest, a lot of people on the planet have no clue about what we're talking about. Having said that,
You think that?
I like to think that maybe we got an elevated audience. I can project our idea in the world, for one thing. No, but
I think the world is actually slightly brighter than you're giving them credit for, quite honestly.
Well, that works too. But the idea of projection, and this is a whole other piece too, that we do have this tendency to paint other people with a brush of our own creation.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the idea of projection. It does have its senses. We don't actually see them as they really are. We see them with the lens of how we were raised. As you were saying about those imprinted from our childhood, those projections, those, for want of another word, like telegraphing on top of these other people what we think they should be like, or what we remember our parents or our caregivers giving to us, is to then paint other people with the same brush. And that's the thing, is that we don't hear that person necessarily clearly. We actually hear them through the filter, or through the filter is the best word, through the filter of what we believed first. So we don't actually hear them honestly either. So we actually hear what we, I don't say want to hear, but we tend to hear because we were raised that way.
Exactly. And to even add on to that, we can also have an unmet expectation from our childhood. Say we had a pet, like, again, I'll just use my father for an example. It's a big confession here. My son teases me about it. He's like, "Mum, for somebody that had daddy issues, how can you found a man that was so normal?" Meaning my cousin.
That's high praise, isn't it?
But I must admit, when I was young, I did have daddy issues, and I did project. There was a hunger or a need for that sort of male father figure when I was younger. And I would sort of be somewhat attracted to some men that had that quality. And I would have the expectation that they would behave a certain way with me. And so any man out there that I may have done that to, I profound apologies. Not anymore. But there was that sort of, the desire was still there. That wound, that emotional wound was there to still get that part of me fulfilled. That sort of nurturing in a protective, probably fathering way, which is not exactly healthy when it comes to relationships.
No, that is. I mean, that's the work. I mean, that's what we've both done, and many people have done, is to really start to disengage those childhood imprinted automations, so to speak. Because the thing is, what these are is the things that we didn't consciously choose to learn or take on as a choice or a way of doing things. It's automatic pilot for us now. So to really have a really clean relationship to ourselves, so we can have a clean relationship with other people, is really where the work is.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's so important that we do that. So I'm going to ask you again. So I'm thinking,
Ooh.
I'm just, I've fessed up to being having daddy issues here.
Ah,
So were there any? Do you think? I'm just curious. I'm tossing it back to you. Were there any sort of expectations that you did not feel were fulfilled from either one of your parents that you expected from your partner?
growing up in a family, I mean, part of it's because this is the English, Jewish, reserved, stoic family that I came from. My father wasn't very emotionally expressive, and so I had this duality inside because I knew that I was an emotional person as a boy growing up, but I didn't feel I could express it because I had to copy my dad's modeling, so to speak. So into my early dating life, and for several years into my 20s, probably into my 30s, I didn't have emotional freedom to express, especially in relationship. So I held back from that point. And on the other side of that, my mother was pretty much the center of the family as far as I felt. And so any girls I went out with had to sort of measure up to that level in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and frankly didn't. Not that I wanted to someone like my mother, because I wasn't looking for that. I mean, that was so not what I wanted romantically.
Hmm.
But the caring and the, I'll say it, unconditional love that I felt from her was something I didn't get from any girlfriend. So there was always that disparity in there for me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because I sometimes worry too. I'm just so unconditionally loving of my boys that I don't want to set up my children's, future. Well, my younger son has the most. I love his girlfriend as much as I mean, she's just amazing, and I think he does treat her with incredible respect and love. So I
Good.
shouldn't be too worried about that. But it's hard. I think when you've had a really wonderful role model who has loved you unconditionally to get that in a partner. I mean, it's we can unconditionally love our children, but unfortunately, when we come to our relationships, there are conditions that we have.
There are, yeah.
Yeah.
That, and that's, let me say one thing on that too. That's something I know, especially being in the spiritual community I've been in for many years. There's this presumption that shows up once in a while from people who think that love should be unconditional. So even in your relationships romantically, which means that basically they can do anything they want and you're going to be okay with that.
Hmm.
Part of me goes, no, that's the thing. What you said is true. Relationships are conditional. Romantic relationships, especially, are conditional because there are conditions you require for the container that you want to have for your partner.
Hmm.
So it's important to honor that and not say, well, it's supposed to be unconditional because you're spiritual. It's like, no.
Yes.
A romantic relationship has conditions on it that make it, it's like the walls of the house have to be structured to make it work.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I think we can definitely, I'm part of the Three Principles community, as you know, and um, I have so many people, clients come to me and they're like, well, I feel like I'm being abused, but aren't I supposed to see the psychological innocence in the person and know
Yeah.
that underneath it all, they're just these wonderful people, and that we're all these beautiful spiritual beings, and they don't really mean what they're doing. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. I said, or they'll
No
say things like, is it just my thinking? If I think differently, will will I
change.
experience the relationship differently? And I'm like, if you came to me with a broken arm and a black eye, I wouldn't say, hey, that's just your thinking. Think differently and it won't hurt, you know? And so
Right.
I do think that we can do that spiritual bypass, and we can ignore outrageous behavior, hurtful, damaging behavior. When we subscribe to that, we must be showing unconditional love at all times with our partners.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no excuse. There's no requirement to excuse any sort of abuse that you're suffering because you think you're being spiritual. That is absolutely convoluted and inaccurate thinking. So no.
No, I totally agree. And I don't believe that we should do the type of, when I say our parents love us unconditionally, unfortunately, some of our parents did not love us unconditionally. And
Right.
as much as my father was sort of absent and abandoning and ignoring and all of that, my mother could also withhold her love if she wasn't
Hmm.
getting what she wanted. So I don't think
Right.
we should do that in an adult relationship either. I don't think that we
No.
withhold love. We love, but there are conditions and there are consequences for certain behaviors, and there are boundaries, healthy boundaries. So I find it really interesting what you said. So I asked if there was something missing in your childhood. And did you, so do, and you said that, your father was sort of typically reserved, English
Mhm.
gentleman and didn't show too much, too much love and affection. So did you feel that that was one of your, what, when you were not as healthy as you are today, that you really sought in your relationships and could almost like, take it personally or be more reactive if you didn't think your partner was giving you that love and attention that you had wished for as a child?
No, no, actually, because the way that my dad was, and I had nothing else to course correct from that. I was finding myself, I just held back in relationship. I was not available to, I wouldn't emotionally open up to my partners because I felt that was weakness because that wasn't what I was raised with. So my modeling from my dad, which, because he didn't know, he did the best he knew how to, what he was, he never really, it's like we never hugged.
Mm-hmm.
Like growing up, my dad and I never hugged. I had to force one on him, which basically was something that was really. I remember when I flew back. God, this is going back years ago before he passed away. When this is going to be the early aughts, like 2002, 2003. I went back and saw my dad, and it's like I went to hug him because I've been hugging people for years. I mean, I learned how. It became like this wonderful thing for me to do is hug my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Went up to him to hug him. I could feel him just like stiffen up,
Yeah. Oh.
and it wasn't reciprocated.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had that with my dad. And so I know looking back, and I have great compassion for, because I know where he comes from, what his upbringing was.
Yes.
So again, having done the work. So I look at my father's path and how he was with me. And I felt that for the initial part of years, I couldn't be other than that because it wouldn't be normal. There was like my rules in my head were based on what my dad had shown me.
Mm-hmm.
Stiff upper lip, hold it together, be a man, not be emotionally expressive. Now, and of course, there's a whole cultural thing about men not being emotionally expressive. It's true,
Yeah.
but for me personally, I had that because it's what my dad showed me.
Mm. Yeah. So you had a backwards trigger. You were not
Wait,
projecting on other people so much. You had a history that had imprinted on you about how you could show up in the world or should show up in the world, as it were, if you were going to
I was.
be a man. You know.
It was basically emotionally repressed. Maybe it was kind of a turned off. It was a switch turned off in a way. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I'm not sure it was a emotional trigger, but it wasn't. I mean, actually, no. Take it back. There was one thing. It's because of that withdrawal and the lack of emotionality. My trigger was when somebody got angry. I didn't know how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. I remember you sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because so that's the things I didn't have a template or a way of knowing that I could participate with somebody who was angry,
Yeah.
and I didn't know if my anger showed up what to do with that either. I had no skill set, so I
Yes.
definitely had some triggering moments when relationships would go through times where there'd be an argument. I would just like I think I was shut down. Basically, that was my emotional reaction. I was shut down.
So, so fascinating. I love this subject. I could talk about it all. I
Isn't
could
it fun?
talk about it all day. Both of us do, but it is.
Yep.
But as I said, we don't have to sort of look back and blame and get all caught
Right.
up in it. But the awareness, to not bring it into our present relationships, as I said before, is really important. And having the
Yeah.
courage to say, "Oops, gosh, sorry, I just was reacting from a very old wounded place there, or that sort of inner child that's lashing out right now, or as I said in my case, had certain expectations of being cared for and protected, and desires to be, and to be seen and heard were definitely, as I say. So, um, if, like I say, if I see it happening, which thank God in my present day relationship is, I feel incredibly seen, heard, loved, cherished. So thankfully, I don't
Wonderful.
get triggered in by that. So no, he's
Yeah.
an amazingly present man. So yeah, no triggering going on here. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is a
I
fast.
was going to say that,
Yeah.
that's the thing is that doing this work has given both of us these gifts and these tools. Doesn't mean we are immune to it.
Yeah.
The thing about this work, so for anybody listening who's like, how do they get this? Like, it really comes down to being honest. We talked about this before in the show. Being honest with your partner, so you don't make assumptions, you don't make them assume anything. You say, look, when you said that, I got really triggered because of what happened when I was a kid. Nothing to do with you. That's my stuff to work on. Thank you for giving me the gift in a way.
Yeah.
so I can do something about it.
Yeah.
But that's the work.
Yeah, that's lovely, and that's a great note to end on. That's so true. It really is.
Yeah.
It's just, we're bound to get triggered at times, but as you said, having the courage and the maturity to say, "Hey, this is old stuff. This is me,
Yes.
not you. Let me take a space, calm myself
Hmm.
down, and I'll be back in a minute." So,
There you go.
or 3 days in my case. No, I'm teasing.
Hey, whatever it takes.
Exactly. All right. Well, this was another great show. Thank you, Barry.
Yes.
And
Thank you, Dell.
we will be back next week and another topic.
Juicy topic. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.